Nice thing about it, Bill, is it's a nice mix of organizations and people too. I think you're going to third act and get exposure to new people. Yeah.
Are you still teaching at Middlebury?
Absolutely.
My niece is there, and I'm trying.
Okay. We're having a little difficulty with the live stream, so just bear with us for a few moments. Laura, people aren't getting sound. People aren't getting sound on the live stream. Oh, okay. We're okay. All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm Tom Carlson, pronouns he, him. I'm chair of the Climate Justice Working Group here at First United Methodist Church of Seattle, commonly known as First Church, and our congregation is really honored and delighted to host this extraordinary event presented by Third Act Washington. At First Church, we acknowledge that we stand on the traditional homelands of the Duwamish, the first people of Seattle. We honor and respect members of the Duwamish tribe, past and present, as well as the land and waters we share. May we live consciously and respectfully with one another, mindful of the sacredness of all God's creation. So, wow, what a gathering of climate and democracy defenders. A full house here, and I think it's about 450 people joining the live stream tonight as well. And so that includes 4 watch parties in the Seattle area, 1 in Wenatchee, 1 in Olympia, and 1 in Yakima. And those are the ones we know of. So let's give a warm welcome to everybody watching online. A huge thank you to all those who have made this event possible. First, the many Third Act Washington volunteers. Lisa Howe Verhoevic, my co-event organizer, Jock McKinley, Polly Zellweger, Sally Jackson, Chris Gels, Marjorie Ringness, Dale Alakel, Tamara Broadhead, Martha Hesser, and Cindy McAlpin of Third Act, Oregon, where Bill's going next, by the way. And many, many thanks to the 35-plus allied organizations who have helped promote and are represented here tonight. And the 15 groups who have tables back in the lobby. I hope you had a chance to visit them on key ways you can get involved in protecting our climate and democracy. If you haven't checked it out before, there'll be some time after the program tonight. Last, but heartfelt thanks also to the some 40 volunteers for tonight. Volunteers, please raise your hand if you're in the audience and be recognized. Last but not least, to our pastoral leadership at First Church, and especially to the Reverend Jackie Celine, our associate pastor for community engagement, for providing this venue and all of the associated arrangements, and I can tell you they've been many. Here's an overview of tonight's program. After Bill's introduced, he will speak for 30 minutes, followed by a question and answer session. Question cards, 3x5 index cards, are in the pews, in the little pockets in the pews, for you to write your questions on. And live streamers, you can put your questions in the chat as well. We'll have volunteers periodically going around, if you have index cards, to collect them and deliver them over here. And Bill will try to answer as many questions as possible. If you have an index card and you have a question on it, please pass it this way. The people that are picking up the index cards will pick them up on the ends of the pews this way. Throughout the evening, you can help us spread the word on social media with the hashtag BillMcKibben I think it's up on the screen, but BillMcKibben Seattle. Following the program, feel free to mingle until 9 p.m. when we need to clear out the building. And now I turn it over to the amazing Lisa Verhoevic, who will say a few words about Third Act and Third Act Washington, and introduce our special guest, Bill McKibben.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, Tom. And wow, is this not a gorgeous venue? It's beautiful. Yes. I'm Lisa Verhoevic, and I'm a Third Act volunteer, and I'm just so glad that you are all here, all of us in person in this beautiful space. So before introducing Bill, indulge me a little bit in telling you about Third Act, bless you, Bill, about Third Act and Third Act Washington. Third Act was launched by Bill and a small, scruffy group of us in early 2022. The idea was to harness the passion, the skills, resources, and connections of people over 50 around climate and democracy issues. 2.5 years later, we have over 70,000 members nationwide. And we have 34 working groups across the country. And we have had some real impact, which you're going to hear more about from Bill. The working groups I just mentioned, of which Third Act, which we call TAWA, is one, are all volunteer-led and organized by affinity. So we have Third Act lawyers, Third Act artists, Third Act educators, and also by geographic location. Everything we do in partnership with allied organizations, and we are deeply grateful for their support. Many of them are tabling here tonight, and I really hope you'll stop by and visit them and learn about what they're doing. So a little bit, what does Third Act do? We organize and we act together on the major national campaigns that developed by Third Act National, and we also work on local issues and priorities. And here are a few examples of the projects that we are working on. We are pushing hard to defeat Initiative 2117. Bill's going to talk more about it, and you can learn more about it at the tables, including the partners we're working really closely with, Climate Solutions and Washington Conservation Action. We're engaging with Washington's Utilities Transportation Commission, together with the Washington Clean Energy Coalition, to build a more robust process that speeds up utility fossil fuel phase-out. Really important. And we are working to stop the financing of fossil fuel expansion. We collaborate with a fabulous organization called This Is What We Did, and we offer support and resources to people who are interested in moving their money out of climate bad banks. And we are really proud that Third Act Washington was instrumental in launching the Costco Citibank campaign in 2022. We were the first in the nation to ask Costco, an important client of Citibank, to pressure Citi to stop funding fossil fuels or else drop Citi as its credit card user. With partners including Sierra Club and Stop the Money Pipeline and so many others, we have to stop the investments in the expansion of the fossil fuel industry. We have to. Together with Divest Washington and Puget Sound Advocates for Retirement Action, we're meeting now with key legislators on developing a strong bill on fossil fuel divestment for the 2025 legislative session. This bill would require the Washington State Investment Board to start divesting much of its $8 billion invested in fossil fuels. And finally, last but not least, we are working with our local partner, Common Power. We're providing education and actions that seniors can take to safeguard our democracy and protect climate-friendly policies at the polls. Our Third Act Washington working group is nearly 500 people, and we're growing. We welcome new members, and we hope you'll check us out. Please go visit our table tonight, and also check us out online. We'd love to have you. All right, so now to Bill. There you are. It is my great honor to introduce one of my very best friends on this planet, Bill McKibben, tonight. Bill McKibben. Bill and I met in 1985 when he was still very early in his journalism career. He and my husband, Sam, were dashing around New York City as young reporters, finding stories in every corner of the city and having a blast doing it. Bill, I could never have imagined then that I would be here tonight introducing you as one of our nation's and our world's most effective climate journalists and nonstop rabble-rousers. Bill is here with his amazing partner in life, Sue Halpern, one of my best buddies, a fabulous journalist as well as a novelist, and I want to take a moment to recognize her. She is a force of her own and a steady partner in our movement. So Bill, he's a contributing writer to The New Yorker and the founder of Third Act. He co-created the first global grassroots climate campaign, 350.org, and he currently serves as the Schumann Distinguished Professor in Residence at Middlebury College in Vermont, where he and Sue live. In 2014, Bill was awarded the Right Livelihood Prize, sometimes called the Alternative Nobel, in the Swedish Parliament. He's also won the Gandhi Peace Award and honorary degrees from 19 colleges and universities. Bill has written over a dozen books about the environment, including his first, The End of Nature, which Sam and I are so honored to be acknowledged in. Published that in '89, and his latest book is The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon. A graying American looks back at his suburban boyhood and wonders what the hell happened. Bill.
Well, at least microphone, so it's not my fault. Let me see here. Can you hear me now? You didn't miss much. To be here with Lisa and Sam is great fun. Tom, thank you so much. And thank you so much to the people here at this church. I'm, as it turns out, a Methodist myself, but we live in a little tiny town out deep in the woods, so our Methodist church would fit easily in the room back there with the tables. I feel like I've come to sort of the Sistine Chapel of Methodism, and it's very nice to be here. In fact, it's an extraordinary pleasure for me to be here. I worry a little more of a pleasure for me than for you. I've had pretty much a perfect day in Seattle. I got to go hike in Discovery Park early this morning, and then we were out walking on the banks of Lake Union, and We had the best banh mi sandwich I've ever had, and I, since my father was a Seattle native, I know that this kind of weather is not to be taken for granted, And here you all are. We've summoned you inside to listen to a talk by someone who basically is a professional bummer-outer of other people. That's been my work for a long time, and I make no real apologies for it, but I will try to end this talk on higher ground with some hope. It's not I make no extravagant promises about that, because the last 4 or 5 days have felt like a succession of kicks in the gut. But there is things to be done and things to be said. So I will start. I've just noticed that from up here, I have a tremendous view of the top of the Space Needle. This is very nice indeed, I must say. We're going to start in the valley. We're going to start actually in the Caribbean, where as we meet today, the first Category 5 hurricane that ever formed in the Atlantic in the month of June is now, having ravaged the Windward Islands overnight, is now bearing down on Jamaica. It's the strongest storm we've ever seen in June or July. It intensified more rapidly than any storm we've ever seen, which is not surprising because the water across which it is traveling is 3 or 4 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it should be. That's hurricane fuel, and there are people right now hunkered down in their basements listening to the howl of the wind. Right now in Delhi, the second biggest city in the world, there are people, many of them, trying somehow to deal with record flooding. That record flooding came 3 days after the end of the record heat wave in the history of Delhi, when the temperature in a city of 35 million people topped 122 degrees Fahrenheit, something we've never seen before. We're going to get a little taste of that on the west coast of the United States over the next few days. Seattle may get off relatively easy, but California, no. The prediction is that Death Valley by the weekend may be challenging the all-time temperature record on this planet of 130 degrees Fahrenheit. When I wrote that book, The End of Nature, in 1989, I think I was basically thinking about 2023 and 2024. These are the years when finally we're seeing all the warnings happening, not piecemeal, but constantly, very much in real time. Something broke loose in the last 18 months, and we've moved into a new phase of this climate challenge. Beginning about January of last year, I started hearing from oceanographers I knew who would call up and say, you got to look at the temperature of the ocean. It's been rising steadily for 3 decades, but all of a sudden it was spiking. By this time last year, there were temperatures, the highest recorded ocean temperatures ever off the Florida Keys. The buoys there were showing a temperature day after day of 101 degrees, which is what you set your hot tub to. Okay? That had moved on shore by this time last year. In fact, it was this week, at the very beginning of July, that we had the hottest days ever recorded on this planet. We're able to take the average temperature of the planet every day. There's enough thermometers scattered around the world that we can get an average temperature for every day. And we smashed every record at the solstice last year. In fact, the scientists can give direct records that go back about 200 years, but they're good at building proxies, glacial cores, ocean sediments that take us much further back. And they were saying quite confidently that the temperatures we were seeing were the hottest in the last 125,000 years. Okay? 125,000 years ago, the anthropologists tell us, is when humans started etching symbols on bone, okay? It's about as far back as humanity as we understand it goes. Nothing that we understand as a human society or civilization has dealt with a temperature regime like the one we are seeing now. So far, 2024 is coming in hotter than 2023. We have passed the 1.5 degree Celsius temperature mark that we set in Paris as the thing to avoid. We were above it last year, we're above it this year. Even if La Nina kicks in and this rapid warming subsides for a moment, we're going to stay there for a while. The danger now is that we're going to go much, much higher. We're on a trajectory at the moment that will take us to something like 2.5 or 3 degrees Celsius rise in temperature. If we let that happen, then we will not have civilizations like the ones we are used to. That is too much violent flux and chaos happening too rapidly. If nothing else, the UN predicts that that's enough to produce between 1 billion and 3 billion climate refugees on this planet. Look at what happened to our politics and to the politics of Western Europe when 1 million refugees showed up on the shores of either continent. Now multiply that by 1,000 and try to figure out what kind of world we would be living in. And that's before we start talking about what happens to agriculture and what on and on and on and on. So it is unbelievably important, the biggest job that humans have ever undertaken, not to stop global warming, that is no longer on the menu, but to stop it short of the place where it cuts civilizations off at the knees. And we need to do it for the most practical of all possible reasons, but we also, and since we're in a church, it's worth reminding ourselves, we need to do it for deep reasons of justice as well. You know, last summer we had, Sue and I, record rain and record flooding in Vermont. Our capital city was basically out of business, still kind of is, because everything washed away. But we have enough money left in Vermont and in most of America to at least be able to rebuild some of that and get ourselves back on our feet for the moment. That's not true in the rest of the world. The week that the rain stopped in Vermont, it started in North Africa. Libya had the biggest rainstorm they have ever had too, just like we did in Vermont. Theirs was so big that it washed out 2 dams and then swept 10,000 people out to sea where they drowned in an hour, okay? All of Africa has put about 3% of the greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. The US, which has about 3% of the world's population, has put about 25% of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The stuff that came out of the tailpipe of my family's maroon Plymouth Fury when I was getting my learner's permit in 1974 in the suburbs of Boston is still up there in the atmosphere trapping heat. This is our story playing out. It is the biggest thing that human beings have ever done by large orders of magnitude. It is scary, and it is proper to feel scared and guilty a little bit, and anxious, and all of that. All right. We're through the really hard part, and now we're going to start in on what we need to do about it. Because there are things to be done about it. In fact, it's a kind of interesting moment, because in an almost Hollywood script kind of way, at precisely the moment that the danger has reached its maximum point so far, on the horizon appears the glimmer of the solution. Last July, which had the hottest temperatures in 125,000 years, was also the first month at which human beings began installing a gigawatt's worth of solar panels every day. A gigawatt is about the equivalent of a nuclear power plant. So we were putting up a nuclear power plant's worth of solar energy by last July every day. Half of that was in China, but that leaves a lot in the rest of the world. We're now, because this continues to accelerate, doing that about every 12 hours, okay? This is not fast enough to catch up with the physics of climate change, but it's fast enough to at least put us in the place where we can see in the distance the possibility of beginning to get where we need to go. The International Energy Agency said last week that we need to increase the pace by about 50% over the next year or two and then hold that pace. That's very hard, but it's not impossible because scientists and engineers have done their job. They've dropped the price of renewable energy 90% in the last decade, okay? We now live on a planet where the cheapest way to produce power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. That is a water into wine miracle that we are able to do that. And if we took full advantage of it, we'd begin to make real progress. You can see it starting to happen. I wrote a piece in the New Yorker last week about what's happened in California this spring. California has done more than almost any place to really try and build this stuff out. And all of a sudden, they've got enough solar panels and enough wind turbines that pretty much every day since the 1st of March, they've been supplying more than 100% of their electric demand for large parts of the day from hydro, sun, and wind, okay? That means that when the sun goes down at night, the biggest source of supply to their grid is now batteries. And there were no batteries on their grid 3 years ago. This is new. It's happening. We can make it happen fast if we go to work. We have incredibly important new things. We have electric vehicles of all kinds, electric cars, maybe even more importantly, e-bikes that now are being sold and ridden in every corner of our planet. We have heat pumps to replace the furnace in your basement. We have induction cooktops. None of this stuff comes without cost. You have to go dig up lithium and cobalt and things, and we need to figure out how to do that as humanely and environmentally responsibly as we can, and there are good things happening on those fronts every day. Among other things, as the technology improves, we're figuring out how to substitute things, sodium for lithium in big batteries, and there's a lot of sodium. We're finding that we can get much of the things like lithium that we need out of brine, seawater brine, and out of brine from places like the Salton Sea instead of having to mine. But it's going to come with a cost. There is no free lunch. The question is, how does that cost compare to what we are doing now? And there the answer is extraordinarily clear. On a world that ran on renewable energy, we would have a dramatic reduction in the amount of mining that we had to do. And if you think about it for a moment, you'll quickly understand why. If you go get yourself some lithium and put it in a battery, there it sits for the next quarter century patiently doing its job. If you go get yourself some coal, what do you do with it? You set it on fire, and then you have to get some more coal the next day. 40% of all the ship traffic on planet Earth is just carrying coal and oil and gas back and forth from where it's mined to where it's going to be burned. 40%. Think about that for a minute, and you get a sense of the kind of dematerialization that's possible as we start to move. And as we make that move, it's not only that we begin to take on the absolutely existential risk of climate change, it's that we also start to do things like dramatically cut air pollution, even if fossil fuel was doing nothing to raise the temperature of the planet. It kills 9 million people a year on this planet just from breathing the particulates that come out when you burn it. If you have been to Delhi or Shanghai recently, you have a visceral sense of that. But it happens here too. There are hundreds of thousands of cases of childhood asthma in this country caused by the combustion of fossil fuel, and we know who gets to live next to highways and next to refineries and so on and so forth. None of that is necessary anymore. We also have the prospect of no longer relying, as long as we rely on coal and gas and oil, which are only available in a few places, the people who control those places will have too much power in our world. In our country, our biggest oil and gas barons were the Koch brothers. They used their winnings to deform and degrade our democracy. If you want to know why the Supreme Court done what it's done in the last 3 or 4 days, there's your answer. Go back to it, and you can trace the history with no problem. In Europe, the biggest oil and gas baron is Vladimir Putin, and he's used his winnings to launch a land war in Europe in the 21st century. It would be very nice to deprive these guys of their lifeblood, because sun and wind are available every place on this planet. What I'm trying to say is, we are at the moment when it's one of those rare evolutionary leaps that are possible for our species, when we could stop setting things on fire on this planet. For 700,000 years, humans have set things on fire. Darwin said that fire and language were the two things that set humans apart. And fire was mostly good. We learned to cook food. We got the big brain. We could move away from the equator. Nobody was living in Seattle before fire, The anthropologists even think that standing around the campfire all night or for eons has something to do with the social bonds that mark our species. It was a kind of proto-Zoom, And then when we learned to control the combustion of coal and gas and oil, we got modernity. But now the price is too high, and we don't need to pay the price, because the good Lord hung a large ball of burning gas 93 million miles up in the sky, and we know how to take full advantage of it. We can catch its rays on those panels. We can take advantage of the fact that it differentially heats the earth, producing the wind that turns those turbines. The sun that already provides us with light and with heat and with photosynthesis is perfectly willing to provide us with the power that we need to run our lives. It could be one of the great blessed transformations that we've ever made. But, and here's the next part of this kind of Hollywood script that's playing out, but it has to happen very, very fast. We do not have any time to spare. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, our world's climate scientists, have told us we need to cut emissions in half by 2030 in order to have any hope of staying on that kind of Paris path that we set out just 8 or 9 years ago. 2030, by my watch, is 5 years and 5 months away. That doesn't give us a lot of slack. This is at the bleeding edge of the technologically possible, even if everybody on this planet was working in good faith. And I hate to break it to you, but everyone on the planet is not working in good faith to get this done. We have the richest industry historically in the world, the fossil fuel industry, doing everything that they can to slow this transition down. We know now from great investigative reporting that they've spent the last 35 years building this architecture of deceit and denial and disinformation around the facts of climate change itself. That's no longer really possible. There have been too many floods and fires, and it takes someone as credulous as the former president to still kind of believe that something isn't happening. So they've pretty much given that up, but now they're engaged in what you might call solutions denial, insisting that we're not ready to move to renewable energy, that it's going to have to take a long time, on and on and on. We'll talk a bit more about this when we get to 2117 in a minute. That's simply a lie. but it's a powerful one. And even in many of the minds of people in this room, I imagine, we still are thinking of sun and wind as alternative energy, as the kind of whole foods of energy, But it's not. It is the Costco of energy. It is the cheap stuff available in bulk, and we should start using it and using it now. These fights are playing out in very real time. Third Act helped take the lead last fall in convincing the Biden administration to pause the granting of permits for new terminals for exporting liquefied natural gas to the rest of the world. This sounds like a kind of small thing. It turns out to be It turns out to be the biggest climate bomb on planet Earth if the LNG industry keeps building at the pace they've proposed and gets the projects that they've proposed endorsed by the federal government. Then within 5 or 6 years, American LNG will be producing more greenhouse gases than everything that happens on the continent of Europe. Every house and car and factory from Athens to Helsinki will be doing less climate damage than liquefied natural gas exported from the US Gulf of Mexico. Those are the kind of stakes in this fight, because if they're able to keep doing that, they'll lock in those Asian countries that are importing that stuff for another 40 years, We'll never, ever be able to deal with this crisis. And once we go past a certain point, there is no dealing with it. Once the Arctic is melted, nobody has a plan for freezing it back up again. So that need to move fast, to catalyze this reaction, that's why we have to build movements. It is crazy in some ways to have to build movements about this. Every time I end up in handcuffs, and I have ended up in handcuffs more often than I thought I would, as a young man, I find myself thinking this is very stupid. Why am I getting arrested to try and make our leaders pay attention to physics? But it turns out that that is what it takes. Let me give you just one example, because it squares up with some of the work that's happening here in Washington. We started this divestment movement from fossil fuel 12 years ago now. The very first public presentation of it was at Benaroya Hall in this city, and I bet there's a few people here who were there that night and filling that place, and it got us off to a rousing start. At this point, it's become the largest anti-corporate effort in history. We're at $40 trillion now in endowments and portfolios that have divested from fossil fuel. But the reason I want to tell you the story is that the kids who took that work onto campuses, which is a big part of it, they did extraordinary work and they developed extraordinary skills. And when they graduated from college, they went on to found this thing called the Sunrise Movement that brought us the Green New Deal. And it was that Green New Deal, with a lot of backing from people like Bernie, that eventually translated into the Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act. There is a through line here from movements eventually to the kind of results that we need. The other thing I want you to notice about that example is that an awful lot of the actors were young people in this work, which is as it should be. They are staring down the barrel of a gun, they understand it, and they are hard at work all around the world. You all know the name Greta Thunberg, and you should. She's one of my favorite people to work with on Earth. I really adore her. But she would be the first to say there are 10,000 Gretas scattered across the planet, many of whom I've met. They have 10 million followers. That's how many kids were out on school strike in September of 2019 before the pandemic kind of slowed things down. That is great. The only thing that's not great about it is that I think I heard a few too many people my age say, oh, it's up to the next generation to solve this problem. Sometimes, to kind of add insult to injury, they would say to young people, you give us hope. That's a nice thing to say, but it's not okay. It's going to take absolutely all of us to get this done. And in particular, it's going to take people of a certain age backing up those young people, because they come at it with all kinds of intelligence and idealism and energy, but by themselves, they lack the structural power to make the change we need in the time that we have. This is a timed test. We do not have time for that generation to grow up and become senators and CEOs and whatever else. We need change now, which means that we need people with hairlines like mine engaged in this work. There are 70 million Americans over the age of 60. That's the population of France, okay? That's a lot of people. But we punch above that weight anyway, because A, we ended up with most of the money, fair or not, about 70% of the country's financial assets belong to the boomers or to the silent generation above them. And B, because one of our unbreakable habits is voting. There is no known way to stop old people from voting, okay? And that means that we can play an extraordinary role. And you know what? We are not who they think we are. The general idea is that people become more conservative as they age. I do not know if that was true at one point or another. The data indicates it might have been, but it is no longer true. And the reason it isn't is because of our generational DNA. If you were in your 60s or 70s or 80s now, your first act was in that period of extraordinary cultural and social and political transformation that we call the 60s and the 70s. And I mean, the moment when we took women seriously in public life for the first time, the apex of the civil rights movement. The first Earth Day in 1970, thank you, Dennis Hayes, when there were 20 million Americans, 10% of the then population out in the streets, and where we managed to change the zeitgeist around the environment almost overnight. If you have any doubt about how effective those years were, look at the things that the Supreme Court has been targeting. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Gun Control Act of 1968, the Clean Air Act of 1971, Roe v. Wade 1973. I said to some people yesterday, they've now moved on to the Declaration of Independence 1776, but nonetheless, you know, it's this generation that's lived with these things as our birthright and now need very much to figure out how to protect them. There's another reason, too. We have a baseline for understanding and seeing and perceiving all this change. Not just the climate change. We know what winter used to be like in a way that young people don't, for instance, but also the changes to our democracy. We understand, I mean, we remember when Richard Nixon said, it's not illegal if a president does it, and we remember laughing at that, and we remember Richard Nixon leaving in disgrace. So it really shocks us to see the Supreme Court say, no, Richard Nixon was right, you know. Do what you want. There is, right now, no easy through line to exactly how we're going to make change. We're in a period, especially this week, of kind of groping and grappling for what the next steps look like. But we have things to work with, as I've described, and we need big movements to make them work. We need people working together with everything that they have. People ask me often, what's the most important thing an individual can do? And the reason that people ask that is because Americans always default to the individual when we think about things, you know. Sue and I are happy that we have solar panels all over the roof of our house. We're happy that they connect to the EV in the garage. But as I said to people yesterday, we're past the point where we're solving these crises one Tesla at a time, okay? The most important thing an individual can do is be less of an individual and join together with others in movements large enough to make change. And that's what we're doing at And that's what we're doing at Third Act, and we are having fun doing it. Our big demonstration, I was thinking about this because I'm going off to get arrested on Monday at Citibank in New York where we're doing all this stuff. But including this wonderful Costco campaign. But our big demonstration against the banks last year, we had 100 demonstrations in 100 cities, including a beautiful one here in Seattle. I was in D.C. where we had thousands of people our age out there. And we sat in, closed down Bank of America and Citibank and Chase and Wells Fargo for the day. But we've reached the point really where sprawling on the concrete for 4 or 5 hours is not as much fun as it might once have been. So we, went to the Goodwill there in Washington and got every rocking chair they had, and that's what we shut down those banks with. And the Times the next day called it the Rocking Chair Rebellion. We're going to figure out how to make the change that we need, and we are going to do it together. That's the point. So, we've gone from the very global, from the Caribbean and New Delhi and things. Let's talk, as I close here, about the very local. You guys have a fight over the next 4 or 5 months about this Proposition 2117 that we need everybody hard at work on. Washington has been the number of great movement moments that there have been in this place over the last decade or two around fossil fuel have been magnificent. I remember all the kayaktivists out blocking the big Shell drilling rig in a picture I've shown 10,000 times around the world. I remember the great stand at Cherry Point in Bellingham to stop that, and the kind of green line that really stopped the export of coal out of the Powder River Basin to the Pacific. And you've also been blessed with great and effective climate leadership, groups like Climate Solutions and things, and people like Governor Inslee. And so you eventually got this excellent piece of legislation, the Climate Protection Act. So what do you know? Out of the weeds springs a hedge fund billionaire to announce that he doesn't like it, and he's going to try and make it go away. And he's going to do it by claiming that it increases the prices of groceries and gas. The first person to ask about the price of groceries is definitely a hedge fund billionaire, in my experience. In fact, it's all nonsense. They're easy tests to figure out what kind of damage it's doing. All you have to do is look at the price of gas on the border between Oregon and Washington, and the differential between those has barely budged as this has happened. But it's doing extraordinary number of excellent things, big and small. People are doing things like reducing the risk of wildfire. There are electric school buses and ferries going up. People are building the bike paths that we need as we start replacing automobiles. It's working for farmers. It's working for tribes. It's working in so many ways. And those things happening are precisely the reason that people want to shut it down, because that kind of change is threatening. When things start really working on local levels to make people's lives better and imagine what the world could look like. Washington would be so foolish to give this up. This transition is the next great step that humanity is taking, and the places that are out in the lead on it are obviously going to benefit from being out in the lead. And that's where Washington is right now, but they're going to try not just to put the brakes on this one law, but to say you can never have a law again that does anything about climate change. It's not maybe It's right up there with Ron DeSantis, who last week announced that Florida would no longer ever, you couldn't put the word climate change in any state law or anything else. I mean, Florida is going to go underwater, but Washington, large parts of it are going to burn down and are going to get to, I mean, you remember what that heat dome was like 3 years ago when it came through here. There's no guarantee that this beautiful place gets to continue being the kind of beautiful place that it is. So this is absolutely front and center action, and there is much that people can do. And right now, Lisa, we're going to watch a short video to this point, yes? I will be quiet and watch myself.
Across Washington, people are coming together to defeat Initiative 2117 because it threatens our air, land, and water. And 2117 would gut investments in transportation and jobs in our clean energy future. Initiative 2117 costs us all.
A lot of people depend on transit, and Initiative 2117 would mean hundreds of millions for transportation improvement would be lost.
Clean energy is growing in Washington because we've made good policy decisions.
Investments in clean energy are creating jobs in Washington right now.
The big key to being sustainable and lasting as a farmer is taking care of your land. I've been excited to see the investment in agriculture and sustainability from the state of Washington the last few years. 2117 would actually hurt all of agriculture. Initiative 2117 simply doesn't make any sense, and it would actually cost all of us money.
The Suquamish people see the effects of climate change every day. We also want to make sure that we protect and preserve what we have now. Initiative 2117 is threatening to our livelihoods, threatening to our culture.
But 2117 doesn't just cost us financially, it could cost us our future.
The climate crisis is supercharging wildfires, and we're seeing it summer after summer. We know we're going to face more fires.
There are a lot of children that struggle with asthma. I'm conscious and thinking about Sam's breathing on clean air quality days. I'm terrified on days when it's smoky.
If 2117 passes, our response to wildfires will be less effective. We just can't afford this right now.
And who's behind Initiative 2117?
2117 is being pushed by one wealthy individual.
We've made a lot of progress in Washington with clean energy, and now one rich guy wants to take it all away.
A billionaire taking away transportation services for millions of people that need them is completely out of touch.
Passing 2117 would turn back the progress we've already made on wildfire resilience.
We could lose these jobs.
2117 will cost us clean air and clean water and healthy land and soil.
Initiative 2117 would cost us all too much.
More traffic, fewer choices, that's going to cost us all.
If you want a cleaner and more prosperous Washington, you should vote no on 2117.
To protect our air, land, and water. To protect our investments in the future. Vote no on 2117. We can't afford it.
And you've got that paper there in front of you now, I think, that reminds you of the three things that you need to do to take that pledge. And there's a QR code there to stand. You got to volunteer at Third Act or elsewhere to get this job done. And then there's a list of, you just sit and think of 10 people that you can talk to, because that's what it's going to take. They've got an easy, cheap message on the other side, so it takes explaining to people why this is not just important, but as important as any vote anyone's ever going to cast. So it'll be fun to. I got to say, I'm not deeply looking forward to this election night in November. Part of me is just dreading having anything, and part of me sort of wants to just drink a lot of beer early in the evening and fall into bed. But I promise I will stay up late in Vermont so we can see what happens with 2117 at the end of the night. That would be good fun.
Thank you very much, Bill. That was wonderful. And we're very inspired by needing to do everything all at once. We have questions for you.
Yes.
We're going to start. And the first one is about politics. It says, what are the best ways climate activists can influence the presidential election in swing states?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, and it's obviously a little unclear even exactly what the presidential election is going to look like, and we're going to find out more over the next few days and so on. But whatever happens, the election will come down to 6 or 7 states, and we have to have ways for everybody in the rest of the country. I mean, they're not, it's not like Biden and Trump are going to be visiting Seattle much because they've written this one off. If you want to play a role in determining who ends up, in this case, determining the future of the planet and the future of our democracy, you need to have a way into Arizona and Nevada and Wisconsin and Georgia and places like that. At Third Act, happily, we have a lot of that. We've teamed up with the people who know what they're doing, and so we're phone banking pretty much every night into those states. People are writing lots and lots and lots of postcards. We're even doing things to register young voters who don't turn out. And in fact, we've been doing this program called Senior to Senior with Third Act people writing postcards to high school seniors, telling them what voting meant in their lives and encouraging them to register. Only about 10% of high school seniors manage to register for the first election that they're eligible in. And people are having a good time writing those postcards. And it turns out that if you're 17, there's a reasonable chance no one's actually ever written you a letter before in your life. And so it's a kind of signal occasion. So that Palmer penmanship that you worked hard to master once upon a time in your life is now has a particular, I mean, it's far more exciting than Snapchat or Instagram or something like that, much more novel.
Okay, this one's about education. What role do you see K through 12 education playing in addressing climate change? It is barely mentioned in the work of some of the most prominent and influential climate writers, but educators have more than 70 million young people in their care every year.
Absolutely. This has obviously become a subject that in a lot of places it's hard to even talk about in our schools anymore. The right wing, funded by the oil industry, has done their best to make it verboten to even mention it in place after place after place. I got to say, it doesn't worry me that much because this is one of the things that kids are learning about in certain ways on their own, and information is passing around. We definitely should be doing it in schools, and some states have done a good job of mandating some climate curriculum. But in my experience, kids are figuring it out a lot of the time. In some ways, they may be figuring it out almost a little bit too well, because those levels of climate grief and climate anxiety are, they're beginning to become a mental health epidemic, akin to asthma and things like that. It's not that they're wrong to be anxious and depressed, it's that they need to see that there are people working together to make sure that this doesn't happen. I was telling people last night about the very first time we took action against these banks, and it was because young people asked us to. Fridays for the Future, which is the kind of offshoot of Greta's organizing, called us up and said, we want to demonstrate outside Citibank, but we don't even have credit cards or checking accounts. Can you help? And we're like, yeah, we have credit cards. We'll definitely come help. And so we showed up for the demonstration, and there were, like 200 high school kids, because they completely get it, and they're somewhat sprier than we are, so there they were at the head of the march. But at the back of the march, there was a big group from Third Act with a big banner that said, "Fossils against fossil fuels." And all the kids who saw it were like right on thank you very much. We're really grateful that we're not being abandoned to just try and somehow figure out how to deal with this ourselves. So I guess what I'm saying is there's a lot of good informal education that we can do to try and supplement in places where the authorities won't allow it to happen in the course of the classroom day.
If you must fly, what offsets or donations and/or actions do you recommend?
You can find some offsets to buy that are somewhat better than others. I use a thing called native energy that uses the money to build wind turbines on reservation land around the country, which helps in a couple of directions. But I got to say, it's mildly akin to the medieval practice of purchasing indulgences to for sin. It's not that we nobody can ever fly. That's unrealistic at the moment in our world. But it's that we should be doing it. It's that we should be doing it much, much less than we are. An extraordinary percentage of travel in our country is to go to someplace more or less like the one you are now, but warmer. Trust me, the warmth is coming your direction. So just stay put.
Question about politics. What is your view on Joe Biden continuing to run for office? If you believe he should step aside, who do you think would be the most effective advocate for the planet and be able to win the election?
Look, American politics is tough business. I'm a Vermonter. I've been a Bernie guy all along because he's my neighbor and I like him and I know him, and because I think he's been right about things for a very long time. Sue and I joke, if you go back and look at his campaign when he was running for mayor of Burlington 40 years ago, his speeches are all about the millionaires and the billionaires, and the need to, and he was right then and he is right now, That's not one of the options right now. We're in a very, very tough place. I don't pretend to know exactly what should happen. I write this free newsletter called The Crucial Years, and it's usually just about sort of climate and energy stuff. But the last one was about this question, and the title was Give Joe Some Room. I hope that if he thinks carefully and calmly about the situation that we're in, he'll decide that the great legacy he can leave. I mean, look, his opponent is a person marked by selfishness above all. His selfishness, which is his only real trait, Donald Trump's, is threatening to destroy everything around him. And so I think that a real demonstration of selflessness would be a tonic thing for our nation right now. And I think it might, done in the right way, unlock extraordinary kind of energies that might have some chance, not just of winning the election, but of maybe starting to move us past the just poisoned, dysfunctional, chaotic divide that we seem hopelessly mired in. Something, sometime has to happen to change that. So maybe this is that moment. We shall see, I think, over the next few days.
So, not unrelated, how is the climate crisis a spiritual issue? How is it a democracy issue? How is it a personal issue?
Well, I mean, a spiritual issue, I've occasionally served my time as a Methodist Sunday school teacher in these, as I say, in little tiny backcountry churches. The only qualification for Sunday school teacher is, can you take a tea towel on Christmas Eve and turn a fourth grader into a Palestinian shepherd, and if you can, then you're good to go. So I don't claim to be a theologian theologian with a great depth of spiritual, but I will say, in my tradition, in the Hebrew Bible, the very first thing we're told to do is protect the earth that God gave us, and boy, are we doing a poor job of that. And in the Gospels, the main message is love your neighbor as yourself. And we're doing a very poor job of that too. We're figuring out at this point how to drown our neighbors, how to burn them out, how to sicken them, how to make it impossible for them to grow their food. If you're serious about the idea that we live in a created world, then you should be trembling a little bit for the damage that we're doing to that creation. It's really incredible to reflect on the fact that there are half as many wild animals on this planet as there were in 1970. You remember that in British Columbia alone, the heat dome claimed, we think, 1 billion animals 3 years ago as it rolled through. We have an obligation not just to ourselves and not just to our children and not just to poor and vulnerable people around the rest of the world, but we have some obligation to everything else that we were born onto this beautiful place with, And right now we're failing, but we don't need to keep failing. It's very good to have a dog down front today, just to remind us of all times that it's not just us that's, we're in this together.
Go ahead. We have one last question for you because, like Action on Climate, we're running out of time. So,
nicely done. It's good.
If you and Sue are free after tonight's event, would you like to see Seattle from the top of the space station?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love Seattle. I love this part of the world so much. My grandfather was the only doctor in Kirkland for 40 years. He was the mayor of Kirkland on and off again, back when it was a small shipbuilding town. My father used to ride the ferry across to Sick Stadium to watch the Seattle Rainiers, the great joy of his life. So for me, it's always a pleasure to get here, and such a pleasure to be with you all, and such a pleasure just to say that this work is going to go on and on and on over these next 4 or 5 crucial years. I can't quite tell you about it tonight in any detail, but I'm only going to say this. Don't put anything on your calendar for the solstice next summer, okay? Right around this time next summer, we're going to make you guys be part of a big global day of action that's going to have something to do with the sun, and with the idea that we're going to be able to reconnect in very deep ways back to this energy from heaven, not from hell. That's the slogan going forward in the Methodist Church and elsewhere. Thank you all.
We're not done yet.
No.
It was my bad. We're not done yet. We have time for some more questions. I was just reminded you're not off the hook yet, and since my white mic just went bad, so I'm going to have to do it here, Bill.
More questions.
So
just what you're free to. People are free to leave. There's no
You're not
penalty.
off the hook yet.
Okay.
What do you suggest saying to friends and family that are aware of climate change but don't think there is anything to be done, no reason to be involved?
You have to show them that there is stuff to be done. And that's one of the reasons that I was pointedly tonight explaining some of the stuff that's starting to happen. One of the things that's not good is to fall into such sort of despair, all is lost, everything is doom. It's true we're in terrible trouble, and it's true we're not getting out of this unscathed. There's plenty of scathing going on already all over the world. But we still have a window left open. It is closing, and closing pretty fast, but our job is to get as much through that window as we can in the next few years. And one of the things I would say is, pretty much everybody in this room is going to live long enough to see the outcome of this story. We're not talking about 2050. The important stuff's going to be done or not done in the next 5 or 6 years. Because after that, the physical systems, I mean, look, there's only 5 or 6 huge physical systems on the planet, and they're all in flux now. The Arctic is melting fast. The jet stream is being wildly perturbed. The Amazon is beginning to savannify, desertify at its edges. The Antarctic is melting fast. The sea level is beginning dramatically to rise. These things are happening in real time, and the response to them is happening, we hope, in real time too, almost month by month. So the drama is now, and the time to act is now. If you've been keeping your powder dry for some reason, now's the moment.
Thank you. How can we best accelerate the process of permitting renewable energy generation and electric transmission projects in the USA?
Well, this, I'm afraid, is one of the key reasons, one of the many reasons that the outcome of the presidential election is going to be so important. The Biden administration has not been perfect on climate stuff. They've made some dumb mistakes, like approving the Willow Oil project in Alaska and things like that. But they managed to get the IRA passed, and that provided the money to start doing projects like transmission stuff. And they have set up within the White House a team of 25 or 30 people who are essentially project managing all these things. They are looking at the big transmission corridor. You know, there's somebody whose only job is to look at one of these big transmission corridors and figure out how to get the permits through, and make them happen. And that's what it takes. And of course, that's what will disappear, as Donald Trump has said. Day one, not only will he be a dictator in order to drill, 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 he will also make sure, as he put it, that there is no more wind. A kind of, a remarkable boast, but all of this will grind immediately to a halt. These guys, here's the thing, just to understand, if you want to understand why this is happening, the thing to keep in your mind, to sort of remember is, I explained how the cheapest way to generate power now is to point a sheet of glass at the sun, which is good news for almost everybody, but it's terrible news to the fossil fuel industry. If what you have is a huge reserve of coal or oil or gas underground, okay, the idea that someone could put a solar panel on their roof and then the sun would deliver the energy for free every morning when it rose above the horizon is just the stupidest business model of all time, okay? That's why Exxon has, and do not think for a minute that they do not have this all wired and ready to go. Some of you have read about Project 2025 from the Heritage Foundation. I wrote a long piece about it, the energy parts of it, for The Nation a couple of weeks ago. It's every bit as bad as you could possibly imagine. Trump 1 was no fun, but Trump 2 is going to be deeply organized, no fun, okay? So we shall see.
Okay. Given that the U.S. military is the biggest greenhouse gas emitter, how should the climate movement take this on?
Sure, it's a good and important question. So one thing to understand, I think, is that it's very true that the military is the biggest emitter of carbon in the world, but it only emits about 1% of all the carbon in the world. So it's worth remembering that that's why this problem is so incredibly hard. It comes from everywhere, okay? So, out on the highway, every single rush hour of every single day, that's, just clouds of stuff going up. I think that the real question around the military has to do with what do we use it for? And what we've mostly used it for is securing the supply lines for oil and gas for decades. That's why, it's not like we have some actual that we have some other reason to care about Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or whatever else. I remember in the first Gulf War, the best protest sign I saw, someone had a big placard that said, "How did our oil end up under their sand?" And so if you think about a world that runs on sun and wind, those kind of complications get far, far, far fewer. Vladimir Putin can cut off the supply of gas to Western Europe, and he did, but he can't, we don't think, cut off the sun, So that world becomes more localized, more small d democratic, and more peaceful. It doesn't become a utopia, that seems unlikely, but it allows us to move in directions that we badly want to move for reasons that go beyond the fact that it'd be nice not to set the planet on fire.
Okay. Here's one. I got slandered on right-wing radio for a climate advocacy piece I wrote. What do you do when climate deniers come at you personally?
So you should ask Sue, would be a better person to ask about this. I mean, sometimes I get sad, but most of the time, because sometimes it's very powerful. I had a period of several years where a big oil-funded, right-wing campaign, every time I left the house to go out, they just had a camera crew there that would follow me around every place I went, just filming everything that happened. And then they would just, like when I went to church and things, and then they would throw it up on a website. Not to, I wasn't even doing anything. They were just demonstrating their power at intimidation, And it sort of works. It's terrible. I wish this on no one else. But I will say, I think the only way you can actually try to deal with it is just say to yourself, well, if they're slandering me, then I must be doing something right. And there are days when I wake up not convinced that we're going to win this fight, and I get myself to go by saying, well, okay, but how much trouble can I cause for Exxon today anyway? Even if sometimes that's got to be enough to just kind of keep you in the game.
Given the explosion of AI data centers is expected to double in energy demand in the next 2 years and increase global emissions by 80%, how can renewables keep up?
Well, it's not going to increase global emissions by 80%. That's not going to happen. But it is a problem. And just like cryptocurrency was a problem. And it turns out that Sue's written more about this, but if you use AI to conduct your Google search instead of just your old Google search, it uses 7 times as much energy. So unless you really need, a kind of, to have, I don't know, your restaurant review, delivered in limerick form or something, don't use it in more than you have to. It's going to be very important to try and conserve as much energy as we can on all fronts. But we are going to have to build lots more electric capacity. What's really happening in the world is we're trying to switch everything over to electricity. And in a weird way, the fact that we rely more and more on computers and phones and things is an assist in that process in certain other ways. It's probably not very good for our minds and souls, but it's, I think, not going to be the thing that breaks the planet. The thing that will break the planet will be continuing to use coal and gas and oil. So it doesn't make it any easier, but I wouldn't despair about it. That's not the biggest variable that we're playing with now.
Is nuclear energy really a climate solution?
It is if you have unlimited amounts of money to play with. I mean, forget all the other things that we know are problematic about nuclear power. If I'm recalling my history correctly, Washingtonians have reason to remember that nuclear power comes at a high financial cost. No? Is it whoops? Was that the, yes, the aptly named whoops that that you all dealt with? There may be a role for small modular reactors that people keep saying, but it's going to be very hard because they have to keep competing with the price of solar energy, which just keeps plummeting down this curve. So I think that the way to think about it is if you really like nuclear energy, by far the biggest nuclear reactor is that star 93 million miles up there in the sky, and we're making just use of it at a safe and economical distance, you know? So that's how I mostly think about it.
Very good. And that was truly the last question. I want to thank Bill.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very good at this. Yes.
Thank you all so much for coming tonight. I want to encourage you to mix and mingle in the lobby after the program now until 9 o'clock or so. And please do check out all the allied organizations that are doing such great work. And thanks again to Bill and to Sue. Good night.